Clinch Day might finally be here for the Winnipeg Jets. They need a couple of things to happen, but will it? Let's chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Just wanted to preface tonight's episode by saying apologies for the radio silence the past 2 days. I was on the road for a work conference, and as it turns out, recording became nearly impossible for the last few days. So we're finally back live. We will have a couple of episodes this weekend, and so excited to not only have some good recaps to talk through, but also some real clinching scenarios for the Jets, which might actually happen this weekend, perhaps as early as tonight. Obviously, there's a couple of games that are literally ongoing right now, New York versus Vancouver and St. Louis versus Chicago, and those two could sort of decide things. But we'll chat about that in just a little bit. Before we go too much further, though, and get into all of the fun stuff, did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Now, this past week, obviously, I had wanted to talk a little bit about Winnipeg versus Edmonton and Vancouver. Those games were interesting, and I think this Pacific road trip in general was a little unsteady for the Jets. The Kraken game obviously was a nice result, but it did take some overtime stuff, and then, of course, Winnipeg did lose pretty badly to the Canucks, but I don't really feel like the Canucks loss was nearly as bad as the scoreline looked. For that game, I think my primary takeaway was Hellebuyck having an off night, and there being some, I would say, more defensive lapses here and there. What's really funny is if you look at like the expected goal charts and where the Jets were shooting from, and honestly just kind of going back through some of the footage of that game, Winnipeg really did create great chances to score. They just didn't finish. And Vancouver punished Winnipeg on every single mistake or bad goalie miscue that Hellebuyck had, just to a level that I didn't really expect. I thought the Jets were going to come away with like a 4-2 victory, and instead they walked out with a 6-2 loss. So, yeah, not ideal. I think it's one of those times where you sort of look at this game and you're like, okay, yeah, the Jets are still human, right? They've been winning games for the most part the last few months. They really haven't had many losses where they were beaten badly, right? The Rangers, or not the Rangers, but the Hurricanes game where the Jets were just outplayed in general, I think is probably one of the rare instances where Winnipeg was really, had the game controlled against them. For the most part, they've at least been even. And even in this loss, I still think the Jets were in many ways the better team, but sometimes that doesn't always matter. And if your goalie has an off night and, the team's finishing is sort of absent, it can be a little bit rough. And I think the Jets' third line, which has become one of its big strengths this year, is starting to show some real fatigue. And when you have that combined with the top line that's really not been playing all that well recently, I just think it sets up the Jets for a tough streak. And I do wonder how much of this is maybe history repeating itself. Obviously, we have a little bit of a segment next to talk about whether or not we're seeing the same thing over again. But we'll chat about that later. And I'm hopeful that it's not as bad as, we may worry it is. But for, Winnipeg coming off of a loss, then you get the Oilers. And the Oilers were already going to be down Draisaitl, which is obviously a huge loss for them. But then, at the end of the second period, McDavid had some sort of a lower body thing, looked like he grabbed at his groin, and he was sidelined for the entire third period. I'm not sure if all of that made Knobloch wanted to kind of run a more conservative game, but, as a result, this was one of the stranger Jets-Oilers games we've seen. It was like super low event. This was one of those very low shot total games between both teams. Edmonton really didn't have too many. They had like 24 shots on goal total, which is really, really below their average. I think they were averaging, from what I recall, like over 32 shots on goal, which is pretty unusual. You don't really see that very often from Edmonton, that they actually get held below 32. This team is a very high octane, high flying offense. Well, at least the top six is. But it actually wasn't really those usual standout stars, right? Of course, McDavid was sidelined for a while in the last period. And Jeff Skinner actually kind of led the way offensively. He had a couple of goals. He was a general pest. And as somebody who actually likes Jeff Skinner a lot, I guess I can't really be too upset. But, at this stage, right, he's more of a depth kind of player. And so Winnipeg didn't have to do a ton in this game. I think for the most part, the Jets tended to try and keep things defensively tight. Winnipeg really didn't give the Oilers too many clear looks, and it was a very back and forth effort where there just wasn't a lot of chance creation. When there were chances, they were kind of dangerous, and Hellebuyck probably doesn't love a couple of the goals that he gave up. Second straight start where he looked a little bit shaky, but, it is what it is. The Jets did still come out with an overtime winner. This one courtesy of Kyle Connor. Another shaky first line game where they weren't awful, but they also weren't great. I know Connor had a number of individual shot attempts himself, but I just felt like there were also moments that I recall where he maybe bailed on the defensive read or something where, it didn't allow him to shut down a counter like we're usually used to this year. He's generally been a much more versatile two-way player, and I feel like in the past couple of weeks and months, he hasn't quite been at the races by what we saw through the first half of the season. So hoping that's not a continuing trend, but the third line, they were okay again, but still not amazing. I just feel like, outside of a couple of maybe individual moments where like, Niederreiter finally gets a nice assist and stuff, we're seeing some real limitations. And that's why I was really harping on the trade deadline needing to be a big sort of insurance push, because Winnipeg, even with Schenn and Tanev in tow, still has very clear ceiling caps, right? There's only so much that they're going to be able to rely upon for their power play and for the goaltending. And unfortunately, in this game, the power play again came up pretty empty. They even had a 5-on-3 and couldn't take advantage. They had a power play at the end of regulation, couldn't take advantage. So just some frustrating things here and there for Winnipeg. I'm not so worried, as to the power play as much as I am the more general 5v5 structure. I think that's where, that stuff tends to be, if you can say it, like the stuff that keeps you up at night, so to speak. Again, I think this team is still really good, but I do wonder about how deep they're going to go in the playoffs. And I want to chat a little bit about perhaps some history repeating itself with this team in comparison to previous seasons. I don't think that this team is necessarily bound for the same fate as other playoff runs for the Jets the past few years, but I do feel like there are some perhaps warning signs if the Jets don't try and figure things out in the last 10 to 15 games. But, I mean, this team is pretty locked into its identity, so you just kind of have to hope that all the changes that they've implemented for the broader season, in comparison to last year and how they approach things on top of, their generally pretty good play this year is going to be enough to carry them through. Because I think the lack of improvisation and alteration to this team kind of suggests that the Jets really do believe in what they've got. And I understand why they feel that way, but I might personally have some reservations about that. But before we dive into whether or not history is repeating itself with this playoff approach, I just wanted to let you know about our friends and partners at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where the heck did all my money go? Between dining and online shopping and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. And we all know that with inflation, things have gotten pretty expensive these days. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, though. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So instead of just managing your money, you can also start building your wealth. It's where you can figure out how much you're spending on things like food delivery, subscriptions, and helps you budget smarter and save more, right? We all know that we're spending loads of money on tons of different services and stuff. Monarch Money can bring it all into one app and show you where your money's flowing out and how you can better start to track your finances and set goals for the long term and even the short term. And of course, if you've got a partner, you can collaborate with a shared account so that you can set goals and stay on the same page without all the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Speaking of saving money, I also wanted to let you know about our friends and partners at Game Time. There's nothing like watching basketball live, the energy of the crowd, the sound of sneakers on hardwood, and maybe even a celebrity sighting courtside. If you want to catch a game in person, though, Game Time makes getting tickets easier and cheaper than ever. Game Time's new feature, Game Time Picks, filters out all the fluff and shows you only the best deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time scrolling through thousands of tickets. And as somebody who's actually used Game Time to get NFL tickets last year and the year before, I can personally attest to its feature suite. They have these great options like seat view. So when you actually buy a ticket, you can see not only where you're sitting, but what your view in the stands is like. And for me, that's really important. I want to make sure that I'm seeing the most of whatever game I'm paying a lot of money to go see. But Game Time also gives you, some of the best deals, and they come back with a satisfaction and money back guarantee if you don't have, the best experience. And of course, they've got the lowest price guarantee. So you can always book with total confidence. If you wanted to take the guesswork out of Game Time, go with Game Time Picks and download the Game Time app. Create an account, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about some interesting stuff and perhaps some recent trends with Winnipeg. Perhaps repeating history. I'm hopeful it's not really what I'm suspecting it is. So the past few weeks and maybe even months, we've seen a couple of familiar trends. The top line has started to scuffle, especially post Four Nations break. The third line looks overused and overworked. And this is a more recent trend, really, in the past couple of games. And it's one that I'm a little bit less concerned about. It will become a problem, though, if it continues over the next couple of weeks. Pierre-luc, perhaps, taking a bit of a step back. All three of these things together are probably enough to sink the Jets' playoff odds if, they get in and, face a tougher opponent in the first round. Now, I would say out of all the playoff rounds, the first round is probably the one that concerns me the least for the Jets. Even if some of this stuff doesn't improve by, mid-April, I don't worry about it so much. Pierre-luc being bad could be a bigger problem, but I feel like Comrie has done enough to where if he has to be called upon, I think Eric can do the job fairly capably. Whether the Jets in front of him will actually play well is a little bit of a different story. But I think, longer term, I'm a little concerned about the top line. The Jets' top line has been one of those things where as long as they are generally break even and outscoring their opposition, you're okay to let them keep going if the depth has been able to keep up. And so far for a lot of this year, that's been the case. When the depth scoring perhaps starts to dry up a bit, the Jets really need to lean on that first line, especially at even strength. And recently they've been pretty far under 50% in terms of like expected goal share, shot share, all that stuff. The only area where they're leading right now is just in pure raw goal totals, which is great if you can outscore the opposition. But usually, losing shot share battles, especially in those sample sizes, tends to be a bigger predictor of future success. The finishing talent for that trio can only go so far before you start facing really good teams in the postseason, and those matchup battles that you lose start to have a bigger outsized influence. I guess that's where I worry a lot about this team, and it's why I was really adamant about finding some sort of top six upgrade or middle six upgrade to try and fortify the scoring upside, because I feel like as fun as Tanev is, and he did score his first, goal since coming back to the Jets against the Oilers, he's not the kind of player that typically moves the needle enough to really feel comfortable, right? And so for Winnipeg, I just worry, the deeper you go into this playoff run, will those vulnerabilities start to show? The third D pairing has also kind of been a bit of a rotating mess, and like Hayden Fleury has not been particularly good. In fact, he's at times been worse than Stanley. That Fleury Miller stability that we saw in the first half of the year hasn't really been a thing the past couple of games. Shen at least has fit in pretty nicely. I think, generally speaking, as long as the play doesn't get too fast around the corners, he'll do a good job. But the third D pairing where you were hoping for another upgrade, maybe didn't happen. The Jets also weren't really expecting Pionk to miss several games of action. So I don't necessarily attribute the third D pairing stuff to that specific incident, but maybe you would have liked to have had one more skater on the back end. Jake Wallman, I think, is still the guy that really hurts not being able to go out and get him. He's been really good for the Oilers. So bit of a tough one there, but in terms of like things that I think the Jets can fix, the top line, you do need to rearrange a bit. And, obviously the Jets aren't going to put Ehlers up on the first line, but maybe you try Perfetti or something up there, maybe even Niederreiter. I just think you need some sort of a change. Velarde hasn't really looked at the races recently. KFC is still doing, generally Connery things. I would like to see him kind of recommit to that back checking that he had earlier this year. Shifley is still doing Shifley stuff, so I'm not too worried about them. Velarde has not been great. That, I think, is a bigger concern. So if Gabriel can find some of his old form again, that'd be fantastic. It might just have to be, though, swapping him away from that first line. And I know that the coaching staff is really loath to do that. So, I mean, it just is what it is, right? I just wish that the Jets didn't pigeonhole themselves into what I would say are fixable problems. This is stuff that, Arneal, if push comes to shove, might actually mess around with, but I have a hard time seeing it, right? Sometimes I think, Scott is really afraid to touch things, in part because of his past experiences, and you do feel a bit for him, that having been sort of the stuff that's held him back from really making adjustments. He doesn't want to have a situation where, the room locks him out like it did in Columbus. So I get it, but I think Winnipeg is also at a stage now where they really can't afford for this to be a short playoff run. They have to get as deep as they can this year. This is a really important season for them. The cap coming up is going to be a really big problem for the Jets, and you might say, well, isn't the cap going up a good thing? And not if you're a small market like the Jets. All these other teams that are going to be able to throw money at players, they're going to put the Jets at a disadvantage. Unless Winnipeg fundamentally changes how it operates, and I just don't see that, I think this is going to be a harder sell for the Jets going forward. And we have some big contract extensions that are going to be a problem. We still don't really know what the plan with Ehlers is, and you saw Nick have a couple of really good opportunities. He even had himself a goal recently and was setting up some nice opportunities for his line mates. I think that there's enough uncertainty about how this team is in the future to where, I was really hoping that this year was going to be the one that the Jets really bore down and made things happen. And so far, to a point, they have. The trade deadline, I think, is one of the few big misses so far. And whether or not it comes back to bite them, we'll see, right? I'd really love to be wrong about what, that could mean for the playoff run. But I think we're already seeing some of those cracks forming. And I just hope that it's not a repeat of previous years. This team has come way too far. They've done too much and accomplished so many great things. It would really be unfortunate if the Jets fell short and had a short, abbreviated playoff run. Even if they went around, I still feel like it's just not good enough, which I know sounds a bit silly because, like earlier, I was saying I really hope they win a playoff round, and that can be a good start. But for what the scenario is and for what the moment is, the Jets just don't really have an option but to go as deep as they possibly can. If they play really well and they get ousted by a Dallas or a Colorado or something, you really can't be upset about that. That's just hockey. And, the regular season is still the most important thing at the end of the day when it comes to, rating the quality of a team. Plenty of top teams have gotten eliminated in early rounds. But I guess my sense of urgency is just because I see, age coming up for Hellebuck, for Shifley, for Morrissey. These guys aren't getting younger, and the number of times that you can win with like the best goalie in Jets history and really a top 3 goalie of all time is starting to narrow. So hopefully the Jets can pull this out. Hopefully, over the next few games, we start to see the resurgent Winnipeg show up again. They've got a nice opportunity to do that with an easier, softer game against the Sabres. But then, of course, Tuesday, they welcome the Caps to Winnipeg. That's going to be a very cool game. For the Jets, it's not going to be one where I think Ovechkin has a likelihood to set the record. He has 7 goals now, and he'll have a chance to chip into that tonight against the Panthers. But I doubt that he's going to score 5 or 6 goals before Tuesday. So for all of you who are hoping to see the Gretzky record get broken on home ice for the Jets, probably not happening, barring something crazy. But maybe some other unlucky team can have it happen to them instead. But of course, for Winnipeg, this is a really special day because right now they have a chance to potentially clinch a playoff spot. It seems like that may be going away, but we'll talk about that in just a brief moment. Before we go any further, though, did want to shout out a couple of our partners, the first of which is Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more. Experts ready to help your business elevate to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. For those of you who like graphics design, maybe this is a great opportunity to find somebody who can help make your business really pop with pizzazz, color, and some flair. Obviously standing out amidst all of your competitors is a really big thing, and Upwork can link you to some of those top-end professionals who are not only skilled and can start this work quickly, but you're also looking at cost-effective growth. They can help you find affordable top-tier freelancers to scale your business the way you need to. So visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's UPWORK.com. Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today. While we're here, also did want to let you know about our friends and partners at Bear Mattress.
Did you know getting a good night's sleep is the #1 recipe for long-term success in life? I didn't. It took me way longer to realize than I'd like to admit. It was years of tossing and turning. I was always tired. I never felt like I could live up to my potential. But not anymore, thanks to Bear Mattress. I used their sleep quiz, and I matched with the Elite Hybrid. It's perfect for side sleepers like me. Now I wake up energized. I'm getting deeper sleeps, and I'm ready to attack the day. No matter how you sleep, Bear Mattress has a match for you with a focus on recovery, cooling, and pressure relief to upgrade your sleep and improve your overall quality of life. Go to bearmattress.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL at checkout for 40% off site-wide. This offer is not available anywhere else. You have to use my promo code on the very last page of checkout to get this discount. That's bearmattress.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for 40% off site-wide. Bearmattress.com, promo code LOCKEDONNHL.
Hey, Jets fans, welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us as we are just chatting a little bit about some potential for a clinching scenario right now as we are recording, and literally right as we're recording, some very good news. One of the two scenarios may be increasingly likely to happen. The bad New York Rangers had to beat the Vancouver Canucks today in regulation. That might actually occur. Literally, as I'm speaking just now, New York just took the lead 3-2. Very exciting news for Winnipeg. Obviously, for us, we are really kind of hoping that the Rangers hold their crap together for at least a couple more minutes. They've got about 5.5 left in this game. Really hoping that holds, because if so, there's only one more scenario for the Jets to officially clinch their playoff berth, and that is for the Blues to beat Chicago to beat the Blues in any format. Doesn't have to be in regulation. It can be in overtime, a shootout, whatever, just as long as the Blues somehow do not collect 2 points. That means Winnipeg is in like Flynn. Now, for the Jets, obviously, there's still some question as to which of Vancouver or St. Louis they're likely to see. as of right now, I think it looks pretty good that the Blues are going to be the first round opponent. St. Louis could still crash out here, and they do have one more game played than Vancouver. So obviously that is going to have an impact. But if Vancouver drops today's decision and doesn't get even a point out of it, that is pretty tough. You're then down to 12 games for the Canucks to try and make up ground, which again, it's only 1 or 2 points difference, but every point really does count. And if you're the Blues and you drop today's result, also really suboptimal, I think you really want to add another 2 points to put you as much as 3 points above Vancouver right now. That would give you at least a little bit more breathing room, even though it's really not ideal. But it is very interesting that once again the Central appears to be locking down the wild card spots, but that definitely isn't a sure thing. You've got Vancouver and Calgary both breathing down St. Louis's neck. And then we have another Central Division team that's kind of in the prowling mix, right? Utah still isn't out of it. Now, they may only have one game in hand on the Blues, but they're still hanging around. They're only 4 points back, and they've been on slightly better form recently. They're technically playing above 500 hockey. It's still not great, but as far as the Jets are concerned, they're not really worried about most of these teams. They just want to make sure that their playoff spot is clinched. Washington has already clinched their playoff spot. A little bit unfortunate that it couldn't be Winnipeg that got theirs, but it is what it is. I think if the Caps had been playing in this division, maybe it'd have been a little bit harder for them. But for the Jets, they just have to take care of their own business and hope that, on this side of the bracket, things work out pretty favorably. What is really nice is that Winnipeg might just be able to do it passively, and that might take off a little bit of pressure for tomorrow afternoon's game. Not that there will be that much to begin with. I think this team is already playing with house money, and even with the recent struggles, this team still feels, in my mind, very confident about what it is. I think the Jets are relaxed. I think that they're still going to, maybe have some concerns about their playoff run, but for their quest to lock up their playoff seeding, I don't think that they're as worried about that. And so really Winnipeg, with its top goal differential in the league, is just waiting for some stuff to pan out. And if it doesn't happen today, I think that there's a way it happens tomorrow with a victory. Unfortunately, Vancouver did just tie it again. So that's less ideal. But hey, you know what? The Jets, if they have to take care of their own business and clinch on home ice, that's all right. Something that is a little bit funny about this Canucks-Rangers game is that Vancouver has scored 3 goals on 30 shots, and New York has scored 3 on 10. So if ever there was a very scammy, Jetsy kind of game from previous years, it is this one, but instead of it being the Jets, it's the Rangers. So if the Jets have to do things at home tomorrow, no big deal. Obviously, tomorrow's episode will have a preview of that game. And I also wanted to chat a little bit about perhaps some AHL guys who are not only doing well for the Moose, but might also be potential call-up options for Winnipeg's reserve squad in the playoffs. And I am hoping that at least 1 or 2 of them get their NHL debut here over the next couple of weeks. I don't know if the Jets will do that, assuming that, maybe some things are still in balance and maybe the Jets have to, push for that first seed. But I don't really feel like Winnipeg is in much danger of slipping. I know Dallas is currently taking care of business there, but the Jets are, 10 points ahead. And sure, Dallas may have 2 games in hand, but Winnipeg's already at 100 points. I don't think anyone's really going to catch them for the Central or West. They have got a pretty firm margin over basically everyone. And so this might be where you have some real opportunity to rotate guys and maybe even arrest somebody like Hellebuck. So it's time to wind down the remainder of the regular season, stay healthy, and get ready for the playoffs. But we'll chat about some of the other stuff the Jets may need to take care of tomorrow in another episode for this weekend, and we'll probably have some sort of recap after the Sabres game, so we will see you then. But for today's episode, that has been all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We will see you back here tomorrow, where hopefully the Jets have clinched a playoff spot. But see you then. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.